So welcome back everybody now to the Lightroom course. Welcome to lesson 3. So we're flying through the course already. Okay, so we've had a look at how to import our photographs into Lightroom, how to organize them through the first lesson. Then in the second lesson we started to get into the development module and start to edit our photographs, and we saw that we were able to do a huge amount of work to our photographs through the basic panel. Now we still have a lot of other panels to explore as we will be continuing on throughout this course. But for this lesson, we're going to concentrate on precision enhancements. We're going to have a look at some of the tools that we can use to highlight specific areas in our photographs that we need to work on. There's always going to be times where we might need to work on a particular area of a photograph. No matter how good a job we do on our exposure and making sure that we capture the photo correctly, sometimes it's just not always possible to have every single element in the photograph perfect. And this is where our precision enhancements come in. So what we'll cover now in lesson 3. So we're going to be covering precision enhancements. Okay, so we looked at more kind of, I suppose, blanket type of adjustments in lesson 2 in the develop module, and this means that the adjustments are applied across the photograph. But in this lesson we will look at localized adjustments, meaning that we'll select particular areas where we want to apply our adjustments. So we'll start off by having a look at the gradient filter. And this actually works quite similar to gradient filters that you'd apply to your camera in real life, as we'll see. We'll talk about the brush tool as well, perhaps the most versatile of these tools for working on specific areas of the photographs. We'll use the Radial Tool as well for working on a portrait. We'll do a bit of retouching on a portrait using the healing brush and the cloning brush towards the end of the lesson as well. So just take one moment now here just to open up my Lightroom interface. In the previous lesson we were working from a quick collection, so to save ourselves a little bit of time in this lesson I have already put some photographs into the quick collection that we will be working on in this lesson. Now remember, the shortcut for your quick collections or any target collections you might make for yourself is the letter B. The letter B will add those photographs to your quick collection. So we'll start off by having a look at the we're going to go with the gradient filter. So we'll open this photograph up in the develop module. Okay, we'll just expand out that screen a little bit more so that we can get a closer look at this. Now I think it's clear as day to see exactly what the biggest issue here with this photograph is, and that it's very overexposed here, particularly in the top right hand corner of the photograph. We can see that we have no detail here at all. If we have a look at our histogram, even before we looked at the photograph we could see that there was a part that was suffering from severe overexposure. Okay, now if we actually turn on the clipping indicator you can see it's not too bad, but there's definitely a lot of detail there. There's sky, there's clouds that's not coming out in the shot, so we need to try and be able to bring that back. So what we're going to do first is our basic adjustments. Okay, so we want to use our basic adjustments here, just so we're starting from zero essentially, so that we know that we're working on a photograph that we've already done as much as we can to it before we start introducing our localized adjustments. So the first thing to do is to set the white balance. So we're going to select the white balance selector tool here. And looking at the photograph, I think the swan here is definitely where we can set the white balance from, and actually the shadow area of the swan. Now just what I had the white balance tool up here, you can see there's some options here at the bottom when it comes to your white balance selector tool. Auto dismiss basically means is when I select my area, it'll put the white balance selector back where it's from. You can take off the loop if you want. I mean, if you don't want to have that loop and make it a little bit difficult for yourself, you can switch it off. You can also change the scale of the loop as well, so you can see that you can actually get more detail in if you want. But I think that it's much better to get very close, get right in, into those pixels, so that you can get it very accurate. So underneath the swan here, if I select that area, it'll set the white balance for me, and it's done a good job. More or less in the daylight area. Now, I can see here that this photograph has a lot of mid-tones, okay, so well, it's got a good distribution of tones across the image, but certainly the exposure overall is actually okay. The issue here is what's called dynamic range. This is when you've got a lot of detail in shadow areas of a photograph and you have a lot of detail in brighter areas of the photograph, and the camera simply cannot see the detail in both areas at the same time. Our eyes can see all of this incredible detail, but our cameras cannot. They are just limited in these kind of extremes of contrast or this dynamic range. So what we need to do here is try to bring back some of that detail. Now, the first thing I'd recommend is bringing down the highlights a bit. And you can see bringing down the highlights has brought some kind of details back here. Okay, it's very, very bright over here in this part of the photograph as well. The shadow areas I think are absolutely fine. You could try and reduce the whites down. Okay, and now you can see that has brought a lot more detail back. But the problem here for me is that when you start to do that, it begins to look a little bit flat. Okay, it looks a little bit flat. Now I know we have this high peak over here on the left hand side, or the right hand side, but the rest of this histogram isn't particularly high in its tones. So we could try to increase the contrast, okay, add a little bit more separation, but then we're overexposing this part again. So it's a problematic area, it's a problem for us working on this shot. So this is when we might start looking at introducing a filter or a graduated filter. Now, you'll find our graduated filters here in our precision enhancements, our localized adjustments tools here, just above all of the basic changes. So this is the guy here, the graduated filter, and you can see the shortcut for that is the letter M. Now, these work the exact same way as our filters on our cameras. If you've ever used a graduated filter in your photography, you'll have a good understanding of how these work. Basically, they're usually dark at the top and they kind of graduate off, they become brighter as it goes down, and so that it's clear, so that basically you can underexpose the top of a photograph like the sky and keep all the detail in the lower part of the shot. Okay, so this is helping us to overcome these dynamic range issues that we might have, because this is typically when we'll experience them, is when we are photographing landscapes. So if I click on the graduated filter, it brings up a familiar looking set of sliders. Okay, we have our exposure, contrast, and so on, but there's a few new ones here as well. We've got dehaze, we've got sharpness, noise, moire, defringe, and so on as well. We can also add a color to the filter as well. But let's apply it first and see how it actually works. Now these can come in anywhere on the photograph, but we're going to start from the top middle here just to give you an idea of how it works. So as you can see, this little hand appears as I'm dragging it down into the shot. I don't need to go too far. Okay, and you can see that it's expanding out here the further I drag it down. Now I'm going to switch on an overlay just to show you the area that it's going to affect. So the overlay comes up in red here and it's just showing you the area that it is going to affect in the photograph. We haven't applied any changes, we haven't applied any color to the photograph. We're just seeing where it's going to affect the shot. We can refine it then when we do this, because I can see that this area here is not getting enough coverage, so I can just simply rotate it around so that area gets a little bit more coverage, and I think that's a little bit better. So I can switch this off again, and I'm going to just make a big change here so we can see the effect straight away. If I reduce the exposure down, you can see it's only darkening that area that I have highlighted with the filter. Now if I switch the overlay on again, that red area is showing me the only parts of the photograph that are going to be affected by this. Okay, so we'll switch that back off. Now obviously that's too dark, it doesn't look particularly good at all. Okay, but it's just to give you an idea. So we'll bring that up a little bit. We do want to bring it down though somewhat to bring back a little bit of detail here in the sky. That's perhaps a little bit too much. And we still want to make it look natural. You can't bring back detail where there is no detail. So try to reduce the highlights down a little bit here as well. Okay, so that's having a bit of an impact in the photograph. We can add contrast to the scene here, the upper part of the photograph as well if we liked, but that's going to create an imbalance with the rest of the picture. And so you just can just continue to refine away until you're feeling, you know, happy with the edit. And I mean, that's certainly looking a lot better already. We've brought a little bit of detail back there in the sky. I might just bring it up a little, ever so slightly more. Okay, and the photograph is looking a lot more balanced. Now, we can do a lot more with this. Okay, there's a huge amount more that we can do with this. First of all, we can affect the color temperature if we wanted to. So you can actually, you know, make the top part of the photograph warmer if you like. You want to get kind of a more of an autumnal type of feeling to the photograph, or you can reduce it down if you want to add a little bit of coolness, a little bit more blue to the sky. Okay, now you can see that's a bit extreme that way, but that's one way of doing it. Another way is by coming to our color option here at the bottom. If you click this option, it'll come up with this palette that you can choose different colors from. So you can actually add a color to this filter if you like. You can add any color that you like. So if you wanted to say add a red to it, and you can see kind of more of a pink really because it's mixing with the other colors here. You've got some preset colors here already as well. These are kind of commonly used colors, you know, mainly used in landscapes again. Okay, so we've got a nice kind of blue there. That's a very good one to use. But you can modify it to whatever way that you like. So very, very flexible, and when you're happy with the color that you've selected, you can hit X to close out of it. If you want to remove the color altogether, just drag it to the very bottom, very right hand, as you go to the very, very bottom left hand side or very bottom right hand side, and that will remove the color for you. We'll add a little bit of blue to this, okay, a little bit of blue. Now, that's really all that we kind of need to do to that part of the picture, but we can get very creative with this if we like. Okay, so we can add more than one filter. Okay, so if I'm happy with this change, and I am for the moment, I can click done. Okay, so we click done, and that applies the filter. If I want to activate this again, if I press the filter, the graduated filter again, and press it there again, and I hover over the photograph, you can see this little pin appears. If I click on the pin, this is active again, and I can start working on it. But I can bring in another one if I wanted to. I can come to this option called New. Okay, so they call them masks here in Lightroom. Okay, so it's like a new mask. Okay, so we click New, and I'm going to bring in one from the bottom. So we'll bring in one from the bottom, and we're going to get creative with this one. We're going to change the color of the bottom part of the photograph. Okay, so you can start thinking about how your colors will work together, you know, complementary colors and so on. If you have any experience doing any painting or any architecture or interior architecture even, or design and so on as well, you will have a good understanding of how certain colors will work very well together. And we can start to do that now within Lightroom. So I've added a bit of blue to the top part. So let's try, orange is kind of a good one that usually goes with the blue, or you might try yellow as well, but I'll go with a bit of orange here and see what effect that has on the shot. And I quite like that blend. Now, we can do a little bit more. We can darken that exposure down a little bit. Actually, I'll leave the exposure the way it is. But we can certainly maybe bring those highlights down a little, just to try and bring a little bit of detail back into the swan. You could add a bit of clarity if you want to add a little bit of punch, or you could even soften it, you know. So you can really mix it up in terms of what you want. You can do with these two kind of different filters. Now you can add even more if you like, and you can keep going and going and going, so you can get incredibly dynamic photographs. And quite often, you know, when you look at a photograph that has a huge amount of color going on in it, generally it's through these filters that you get this blend of lots of different things going on. So if I'm happy with this again, and it's just a very quick edit, I'll just click done on that, and we'll just do a quick before and after. And I mean, no matter how many times I do this and now how many times I see it, the difference is always stunning, you know, in terms of what you can do with these photographs within Lightroom. So you can see we've added a nice little bit of blue to the top of the photograph. Gives a little bit of coolness to that part of the scene. We brought a lot of detail back in this area of the branches as well. A little bit of cloud there too. We've added though a little bit of an orange kind of color, a little bit of warmth to the bottom part of the photograph. And there's a nice contrast now of colors, you know, and plenty of detail in the photograph as well. So, you know, that's, I mean, just a very quick example, you know, again, of what you can do, you know, within Lightroom. So graduated filters, they're excellent mainly for landscape type photographs, but they're not exclusive to it. You can really mix it up with all of these types of tools. It's entirely up to yourself what you do with them. So we'll park that there for the moment, and let's have a look now at our adjustment brushes. Okay, our adjustment brush. So the adjustment brush, for me, is arguably one of the most versatile and most powerful tools that you can use within Lightroom. Okay, it takes a bit of practice, a bit of getting used to, but if you do master this tool, it'll really help you to overcome lots and lots of problems that you may be having in areas of your photograph. The adjustment brush works the same as a paintbrush. So we're going to select our adjustment brush here. It's this one here. It looks like a little brush. The shortcut for that is the letter K. If I click this, we get all of the same options that we found with our graduated filter, but this time we've got a few more options here at the bottom, and these are the properties of the brush. So first of all, let's have a look at how the brush works. So I'm going to pop over on an overlay. Just the overlay will show you the area that you're working on, okay? And we'll have a look at how the brush actually works. The first thing to note is the size. Okay, so I'm going to go to just a darker area so you can see it. So we have our size that we can adjust using the square brackets on our keyboard. Remember, you'll find those located left next to the enter button or the return button. Okay, so you can also adjust it down here as well. We also have feather. Okay, so feathering is how soft or hard the brush edge is. And we also have flow and density, and we'll look at those now in a moment. So the first thing to do is to have a look at the effect that feathering has on the shot. So if I paint in an area, okay, so imagine you're using a paintbrush, okay? So I'm painting in an area here. We can see we've got a definite edge around this red area. There's a hard edge there. If I increase the feathering here, okay, so what happens when I increase the feathering? You see now there's two circles. We've got a hard circle in the middle and a kind of softer circle at the edge. If I paint in now, you should be able to see that difference very, very clearly. The edge is a lot softer now compared to that one where we had no feathering applied at all. Okay, so feathering will control the edges of the brush, how hard it appears in the photograph. Okay, so we'll just delete those. So just Control Z just to remove those two brush strokes. The next thing then is to have a look at what are flow and density. So I'm going to just reduce that feathering down a little bit more. And basically flow will control, first of all, how quickly the adjustment comes out of the brush. So again, imagine you are using a paintbrush. You can apply the brush hard to the canvas, or you can use it very, very lightly to gradually build up the paint. So if I reduce the flow down very, very low and I start to paint in, you can see that adjustment comes in very, very gradually. I have to paint it in a lot for it to really become much more dense. I have to keep going, you know, and keep painting in to build up that adjustment. If I have the flow turned up very, very high, it's like the paint comes out all at once. You know, you're applying that brush very, very heavily. So typically I would have the flow down a little bit lower so that it doesn't, you know, I can control it very, very accurately. Then we have density. So what's density? Well, density is the overall level or the impact of the adjustment. When I have the density very, very high, I'm getting the full effect of the adjustment. Okay, so I paint in an adjustment here very quickly. Very, very dense. That's the full density. If I reduce the density down to about 40, 48, close to 50, you can see it's half as dense. Okay, it's half as dense. It's much more opaque. If I keep painting, no matter how much I paint, it'll never become any denser than that. If I go even lower, say if I go all the way down to 20 and I start painting in again, okay, you can see now it's very, very opaque. It's very tough to see the adjustment at all. If I continue to paint and I keep painting, I could be painting for a million years. It'll never get any denser than that. Okay, so density controls the overall level of the adjustment. So what I would recommend, and again this is all completely up to yourselves in terms of what way you want to set it up, but I would typically, sorry I've gone back too far there, I would typically have my density very high, all the way to the max, and I'd have the flow down a little bit lower, in and around 50, so I can control it a little bit more. Now we've got a couple of more options here as well to understand before we can start using our brush. We have A and B. So basically this is just a way of quickly going between two brush types. Okay, so rather than having to make an adjustment every time you wanted to change your brush, you can simply assign one to A and assign one to B. Okay, so you can just make so it's a quick way of just swapping between the two brushes. Then we have erase. Okay, now I can't click on erase at the moment because I haven't made an adjustment, but erase is exactly what it says. It will remove an adjustment for you if you've made an adjustment to a part of the photograph that you hadn't intended to. You can simply remove that. The final thing then is auto mask. What is auto mask? Well, how many of you had coloring books when you were younger? Okay, I'm sure we all had coloring books at some stage, and you know, some of us may have colored within the lines, some of us may have just colored all over the place and, you know, all over and outside of the lines. Think of your auto mask as something similar like that. It'll help you to stay within the lines. If I don't have my auto mask switched on, I can pretty much paint anywhere over the photograph. I have to do it myself. It doesn't stick to the edges, okay? So I can go anywhere I like to in the shot, but that can be very inaccurate. Okay, so the auto mask will help me to stick to the lines. If I switch on the auto mask, it tries to find the lines in a shot, and when I start to paint in now, okay, so I'm just using the overlay here, and I'll just turn up the flow there as well, just so we can see it a little bit more clearly. It is sticking to the pathway here. It's sticking to the path. So it'll help you to stay in the lines. This is excellent, you know, if you struggle, you know, to make an accurate adjustment, you know, you're trying to, you know, work around a very, very complex or complicated shape. Using the auto mask is very, very useful. So let's put this now into practice. We'll just undo that and we'll start from scratch essentially. So I want to make some basic adjustments first of all. So I'm going to just close that down for the moment. We'll do our basic adjustments. We'll set our white balance, plenty of grey here in the photograph to set it from. So I think this is probably as good as area as any. Oh, maybe I'm wrong, that's very cold. Let's try a daylight temperature, so 5,550. That looks absolutely fine. Now we'll do our usual changes. We'll try and bring down the highlights a little bit here, add a bit of depth to that sky. We don't really need to bring up the shadow detail here. If having a look at the histogram, you know, I might bring that out slightly there. Add a little bit of clarity to it, a little bit of vibrance. You know, it's a very well exposed photograph as it is. There's not a huge amount that I need to do with it. But what I am going to do here is I am going to try to bring out and really make this area stand out in the center. So I can use that adjustment brush here again. If I come up to the adjustment brush and I can start to paint in the area that I want to manipulate. So the adjustment brush is very, very accurate, but you will still need to adjust the size of it. So I'm just making it smaller there by using the the square brackets, okay, and I'm just painting in and around this area. Okay, so this is an old mining area, old mining little village that's in Wicklow here in Ireland, okay, which is not too far from Dublin. Okay, very scenic part of the country. So I've painted in that area that I want to adjust. Now, if I get in really close to the photograph, what you'll actually see as well is that the adjustment brush is so accurate. Well, I say so accurate. It's gone more or less around the people here in the photograph. Okay, a little bit. It's caught them a little bit there, but nothing, to be too worried about. But you can get in much closer if need to, if you really need to get into the finer details of the photograph. Okay, but that's looking good to me. I'll switch off the overlay. The overlay is just a guide, and if I start to adjust this then, so I could increase the exposure, and now obviously that's too far, but you can see that I could use this to really bring out the road there. Okay, so rather than increasing the exposure, I'll bring up the highlights of it a little bit as well, maybe bring up the whites too. I don't want to go too far, so I don't want to lose any detail there, but I definitely just want to bring out some of the brightness of that. Okay. So with this, it's always a little bit of a balancing act to make sure that you're not making it begin to look unnatural. Now, see a few students asking questions like, what's the dehaze tool, the sharpness, moire, and so on. These are options we'll have a look at in a future lesson. For the moment, we'll stick with our basic adjustments. Okay, so I could continue to work away on that to my heart's content. I don't think I need to do a huge amount with it. I think just simply raising those highlights is enough. You could change the color of it if you wanted to as well, but I think it's looking fine that way. You can actually add a color the same way that we did with our other our graduated filter. You can also add a color there, but in this case it's not particularly necessary. So if you're happy with all of that, you can click done. Now, as usual, you can also add a second brush if you wanted to. You could go to new and you could start painting in other parts of the photograph if you wanted to do a different adjustment to another part of it. You just simply go to new and you can swap between them then. So if I do say I just paint onto the rock here, just do a very, very quick adjustment there. I wanted to increase the exposure of the rock. You can see maybe a bit extreme there, but just again for exaggeration, you can select that. But you can always go back then with your pins, so you can use your pins to decide which adjustment that you want to work on. If you want to delete an adjustment, if you highlight the pin and you press the delete key on the keyboard, that will also remove that for you as well. So with that done, we can just click done on that, and that will park those adjustments for us for the moment. Do a quick before and after again, okay, just so we can see what we did. So you can see how much brighter that road is. It's really popping out now. It adds a nice little bit of a contrast against that dark sky there as well. Okay, so much happier now with how that is beginning to look. So now that we should have a good understanding of how these kind of masks, these filters work. We'll have a look at the radial filter now as well, but we'll take things a step further too, and we'll start to combine these different types of masks together. So the radial filter is a newer filter, okay? So if you're using an older version of Lightroom, you may not have this particular option available to you. In this case, you would use the adjustment brush to kind of create the same effect. You just basically be painting in a circle. But the radial filter, very, very useful for portraits. Now, it's not just limited to portraits, as we've kind of said before. With any of these tools, it's entirely up to yourself how you use them. But it is a circular tool. So let's apply it and let's see how it works. Okay, so we just click on the photograph and we drag the shape out that we want to begin with. We can kind of move it and refine it, into place once we have it over the photograph. So I'm going to drag it out there a little bit at the edges. I might just turn it a little bit that way. So it's very, very flexible in terms of what you can do with it in this kind of circular shape. So with this, again, we have all of the same tools that we have seen before. Now, if I press the show over the selected mask overlay, I'm going to just make the feather, you know, just bring it down all the way down so we can see the edge of it. You can see there's a problem here. The problem is that the area that I want to work on is the middle of the face here. But as you can see, the area that I will be working on is the area highlighted in red. So what can I do here? I don't want to work on the outside of this filter. I want to work on the inside of the filter. Well, it's very simple. If I come just underneath the Invert Mask option, we can click this here and it will work to change it so that we're working on the inside of the face instead. So the Invert Mask allows you to work inside or outside of the filter. Now we add a little bit of feathering there as well, just so we're covering a bit more of a radius there. So you can see we're covering quite a bit of the photo. Now you can also see we're covering areas like the lips and the eyes. And these may not necessarily be areas that we want to work on. For the moment we will work on them, but I'll show you now in a few minutes as well how you can remove an adjustment. So what we will do here is I'm going to switch off that overlay. We're going to use negative clarity first of all to soften the face a little bit. So we talked about clarity before, and if you increase the clarity you can make faces look very, very severe. That's very unappealing. It's definitely not something that you want, you know, to do to a portrait. Well, maybe it is, but generally you wouldn't do something as severe like that to a portrait. So we go the other way and we can soften things up. Now you can see that's too soft, but certainly, you know, we're on the right lines now. So bring it down a little bit. I don't want to make it too soft. Now, I think that's okay. Now the issue here though is, as I said, it's affecting the eyes and it's affecting the lips as well. These may not be areas that you want to work on. So what can we do? Well, let's make some basic adjustments first of all, okay, which is something I should have done at the very start of this edit rather than doing it now. But you can make some basic adjustments here. So we can change the exposure. Now obviously we're working within the filter. We can change the exposure if we want. Okay, now we don't want to go too bright there. Obviously you can see that's having too much of an effect on it. So you can kind of lighten or darken the skin this way if you like. Okay. I actually think it's quite well exposed as it is. We might just bring up the exposure ever so slightly. Okay, so we can raise up. No, we'll bring them down a little bit, add a little bit more depth to it. So, okay, so you can kind of, you know, edit this whatever way you prefer. I'd kind of want to get a nice contrast here. I like the darks of the makeup here, you know, against the kind of lightness of the skin and a little hints of kind of blush or a little bit of red there as well. Okay, so that looks okay to me. Now, the problem is, like I've said, I've reduced the clarity all over the photograph, but I've also reduced it on the eyes as well, which I don't want to do. So what I can do here is I can remove that adjustment, and I can do that by, if I come to the brush option, as I've got the radial filter highlighted, you can see, and you'll also see this in the graduated filter option as well, we have this brush option too. So if I select the brush, this is a brush within this mask. It's not a separate adjustment, okay? I'm not selecting this adjustment brush. I'm selecting a brush within the mask. Do make that distinction. It's an important one to make. So when I select the brush, I can actually come to the erase option now, and I'm going to get quite close in here just so we can see it clearly. And I can start removing, I will also put the auto mask on here as well, but I can start to remove the adjustment here. Okay, so by removing the adjustment, that means any of that negative clarity effect that I applied here is being taken away. Actually, I might switch the auto mask off and just do this a little bit quicker. Might make that a bit large there as well. Okay. So this way you can get very, very accurate in terms of the areas of the photograph that you want to work on. I don't want those eyes to be affected. Let's go over the other side here as well and do the exact same thing. Okay, you can actually see the umbrella there, you know, in the eye. That's the catch light. We call that the catch light. So you can see the umbrella there that I was using when I was taking these photographs. So if I zoom back out, you can now see that I have removed the selection from the eyes. So that means that those eyes are a little bit sharper now. They're back to the sharpness that they were at originally. You know, but we've managed to keep that kind of nice and negative clarity to the rest of the face. Now we can take this even further. Okay, and what I can do now is if I do make a separate adjustment, now I am going into my adjustment brush option here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in on the eyes again, and I want to add a little bit of sharpness to them. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to highlight the iris of the eye. So using my adjustment brush, okay, we're going to get very, very close and very accurate, and we're going to just draw around the eye. I'm going to switch on that overlay so we can see what we're doing here again. Oh, I'm actually moving it there, sorry. So you can actually, if you click on your pin, you can actually move that adjustment around if you wanted to as well. But I'm just drawing in around the iris of the eye here. So it can be a little bit finicky, as you can see here. Okay, so that auto mask is doing a very, very good job of getting very, very accurate. We move across to the other eye here as well, and we'll do the exact same thing. Now, what we can do here then is, when we've got this all painted in, I can add sharpness to the iris of the eye. I can brighten up the iris of the eye. Okay, it's gone a little bit off there. Okay, so we can remove that now in just a second. Okay, I'm going to just go to the erase option here and just paint and get rid of that there. So now, if I zoom back out, I know it looks a little bit freaky, but if I switch off the overlay, I can start to lighten up the eyes here. Now, obviously, that's a bit too much. Okay, so the exposure is probably a bit too heavy, but I could try and increase the highlights. You know, that adds just a little bit of brightness to the eye. We'll add a little bit of sharpness to the eyes there as well. But I could take it a step further, and I can add color to them if I wanted to as well. So by selecting the color option, we can start to change the color of those eyes. And I do like the blue of those eyes. Maybe we'll try green and see how green looks. Try to find a natural green. Okay, yeah, it's looking a little bit glassy. So again, you want to try and make this look as natural as possible. Okay, so you can, look, I mean, it's a huge amount of fun, to be honest. So I think we'll just go with that kind of blue there for the moment. It's not ideal. I'll try that. Yeah, actually, that looks okay. But it's just to give you a sense of what it is that you can do here when you make these types of adjustments. So we've combined two types of filters here. We have combined our radial filter, and we have combined our adjustment brush as well. Now, so the final thing then that we would do here to this particular portrait is we'd come back to our spot removal. If we come in closer here again, we had a look at this in the previous lesson, but we can start removing some parts of, or some blemishes here in the photograph. Okay, so we've got this kind of shine on the nose. We want to remove that. We definitely need to increase the opacity there to hide that. Okay, there we go. That's looking better now. So you kind of just make these kind of small retouches, you know, to this portrait, because obviously we've still got these little bits of blemishes and so on, but we don't want to remove them all together. We just want to reduce them. Like I said, if you remove them all together, things can begin to start to look a little bit unnatural. So let's see, we'll try on the other side here as well. Bring that down. Now, I mean, retouching, like I said, it's not something I would typically do to every single photograph that I take, but it is a necessary thing to be able to do as a photographer nowadays. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. If we click done on that there now, let's just compare the two photographs together, and the difference is striking. I mean, here we can see very, very clearly, you know, how combining these filters together, you know, how far we can take a photograph. And I mean, there's still a lot more that we could do to this, you know. But we've changed the colors of the eyes. We've added a little bit more brightness to them as well. The skin is looking far, far softer, far, far better. We've removed small little blemishes there. We've softened everything up a little bit as well. You know, and I think the overall quality of the photograph is a lot higher. Now, like I said, there was one thing I neglected to do at the very start of it, which was our basic adjustments as well. So, you know, you can continue then to work away on the photograph. I think the white balance was perfectly fine as it was. You know, you can increase or decrease your contrast, make your standard changes as are per needed. But I think the photograph is more or less finished, you know, and now as it is. So, a lot that we applied there to that particular photograph, and I strongly recommend that you take your time when going over this lesson when applying all of these. Now, just a couple of notes. If you're using an older version of Lightroom, when you go into your filters here, you may not have the brush option. Okay, you might not have the brush option there in the filter, and you have to apply it separately. So you just have to go in and paint over the area that you want to adjust. So you may not be able to find it within the actual masks themselves. Okay. Now, there is also within the the cloning and the healing tools, we do have a clone option too, and I see a lot of people asking what is the clone option. So coming back to this photograph, the way the clone option works is that if you wanted to actually take a part of the picture and say duplicate it, so say if I highlight the swan here, okay, and I click on him, you can see it chooses an area that you can work from to remove that swan. Okay, so it works in a very similar way to the healing brush, but it's a little bit more heavy-handed, I find. So if I increase the opacity, you can see that the say if I reduce the feathering and so on, you can see that the edges of it, like it's actually duplicating a part of the photograph. Now, rather than using this to cover up the swan, another way to use it would be to actually duplicate the swan. So say, for example, I wanted to put another swan into the photograph. I choose this area of the shot, and I can come over to the swan. There you go. I popped in another swan there. So I can then kind of manipulate this, will feather the edges of it a little bit more so it's not so obvious you know, that it's a complete duplication. You might be able to change the size of it as well, just to make it a little bit tighter. Okay, so a little bit of work there needed, but you get the idea here. A clone will actually duplicate a part of the photograph. The healing it works in a slightly different way in that it does exactly what it says. It tries to heal the photograph by blending everything together. So we'll leave that second swan there so he's not so lonely. So I hope that gives you a little bit more insight now into the power of these different tools that we have, the graduated filter, the radial filter, and the adjustment brush as well, along with our spot removal too. So we will have a look at cropping in another lesson. A lot of people asking what's this one here. This is our cropping tool, so we'll speak about that in a future lesson. We've also got a red eye correction tool as well. That is a very, very straightforward tool to use. If you click the red eye tool, you can find where your red eyes are in your photograph and simply click on them. Okay, so really, really straightforward one to use. Okay, so with that, we now have a huge arsenal available to us when it comes to editing our photographs, making our basic adjustments, and then introducing our graduated, our radial, our adjustment brush filters too. So that is the end of lesson 3. Let's just have a quick review of what we covered in this lesson. So we're really building upon our Lightroom skills now at this stage. So we had a look at our gradient filter, how we can use that. You know, primarily I suppose it's used within landscape photography, but it's not limited to that at all. You know, these tools are all very versatile. It's really about how you want to use them. I'm sure you saw lots of possibilities with what you could do with that gradient filter, similarly with the brush tool. as I was saying, I find this one to be the most versatile tool out of the bunch of them here, really, because it can kind of cover everything, really. You know, if needs be, it can be a little bit tricky to use sometimes, but I had a lot of them. If I had to pick one, the brush tool is the one that I'd be using the majority of the time. The Radial tool is very good for portraits, as we saw as well, but it isn't limited to that. You know, you can use these as many times as you like, and you can really you know, I suppose use them for lighting particular areas in a photograph. You know, you could almost use them like spotlights, you know, if you think about it. So very, very versatile as well. Cloning and healing brush then we had a look at too. They're great for doing quick edits within Lightroom, but to be honest, I don't think they're as effective as they are within Photoshop. So the cloning and healing brush for small little edits, as we saw in this lesson, but anything bigger than that in terms of removing objects from a photograph, you'd probably be better off moving into Photoshop, where you've got far better options when it comes to doing removals. So